You can't tell, but I definitely have a floral shirt on. Oh well. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my June wrap-up. So if you guys watched the vlogs that I did this past month, there were 3, so I'll leave those linked down below if you'd like to check them out. You know that I participated in Whatever-a-thon for the month of June, and I also had a slump that has not left yet. So like, I still got through a ridiculously good number of books, but I feel like I haven't read that many, because like I would go in and out of wanting to read things, and then also not wanting to read things, and then starting a bunch of things at the same time, and then not finishing any of them. So it was a mess. But so today is going to be kind of a, I'd say, relatively shorter wrap-up than usual, but we still have lots of books to talk about, because in the month of June I was able to finish 10 books, which was my goal for Whatever-a-thon. So it turned out okay, it's just the process of getting there was a lot. So let's just get right into the stats. So like I said, I read 10 books, and that was over 3,427 pages and about 84.5 hours listened, and that was over 4 audiobooks, 3 physical books, and 3 mixed books. Then we had age category, and I think I did pretty well as far as like the range of things, because we had 1 middle grade, 2 YA, 2 new adult, and 5 adult books. And then genres were 1 nonfiction, 5 fantasy, 2 romance, 1 historical fiction, and 1 contemporary. And then ratings were relatively normal. We had 2 5-star, 6 4-star, and 2 3-star. So the very first book that I picked up, well, that I finished in the month of June, was Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. This was a rollover from May, but it was one that I did kind of count towards my Whatever-a-thon goal. And I'm giving this one 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. Now, it's been quite a few weeks. I always feel like the first books that I read in a month are the ones that I remember the least about. But I remember really enjoying a lot of this. It had a lot of elements, fantasy-wise, that shouldn't have worked for me, but did. Like, we follow our main character, Xinyan, I believe is how you say it. And she is the daughter of the moon goddess, and because of some stuff that happens, she has to leave home and come to the mortal world and basically like try to survive. So she starts working as like a maid for this royal family, and then like basically works her way up until she is the learning companion of the prince. And so they do classes together. She trains with him and does all that fun stuff, and then like what happens from there. And she is particularly good at archery, so like we have a lot of archery, and then we also have a lot of like training and stuff, so there is this kind of like martial fantasy element to it, which shouldn't have worked for me, but I also really enjoyed it. And I think it's because it was archery specifically. It wasn't just like general combat that was part of it, but because that was her focus, it really honed in on archery specifically, and I found that really fascinating. I loved the world. I thought it was written so beautifully. It's got this very lyrical writing style without being too poetic. Like, I don't really know how to explain it, except for the fact of like the actual writing itself doesn't feel like particularly poetic, but what is being described and how it's being described gives it that like fairy tale poetic vibe to it. There is a love triangle in this book, which is usually not my favorite, but it kind of worked in here. My biggest issue with this book is the time jumps. So you do have a lot of time that is basically like skipped over. So like we read 2 pages, but for the characters it's been a few years. And so because of that, some of the relationships and the romance elements of it didn't work as well, because like we didn't see the build up. We just see, oh, and now they have feelings, and you're like, wait, but how did we get there? And we didn't see the actual build up of said feelings. It also felt like our main character was very vanilla towards a lot of things. So like people would like her and tell her things, and she's like, okay, I like them too. And you're like, but I don't see the evidence that you do. It just feels like you like them because they like you. And so there was a little bit of that as well. So weirdly enough, if the romance elements were not in this book, I think I would have loved it a lot more. But they did play a big part in kind of the end of this book. I'm definitely going to pick up the second one. I think the story is going to be really cool. It does have an ending, so that like if you feel like this is it, you're happy with how this ended, it does kind of have an ending, like most first books in a series do. This is a duology, so there's not a whole lot you have to commit to, which is probably why I will continue, because I did enjoy my time reading it, but I feel like I was happy with this, so I will continue, because again, there's only one more. But if there was more beyond that, then like maybe I would second guess it. But I did really enjoy it. I again gave it 4.5 stars. It's just been a little bit of time since I've read it, so like the memories are a little scattered, but overall really enjoyed it. I think this book is stunning, and I do love how beautiful the Fairy Loot edition is, so I'm so excited to see what the sequel is going to look like. But yes, I definitely enjoyed this. This is definitely more of a new adult than a YA, just based on some of the stuff that's going on. But yes, I'm a fan. The next couple of books are the books that I read when we were at the beach, starting with Beach Read by Emily Henry. So I ended up giving this one 5 stars. This one follows our 2 main characters, January and Augustus, but we call him Gus, and they are 2 writers that I think went to maybe grad school together. I'm not entirely sure. They went to college, but I can't remember if it was like undergrad or grad, but I feel like it was grad school. And they're both writers, but they write different things. She's a romance writer. He writes kind of those literary fiction, more harder hitting type of things, and they start this pact, and so they end up writing the opposite person's thing. So like she starts writing literary fiction, he starts writing romance, and they agree to like show each other how it goes. So like every Friday night she will take him out on not necessarily a date, but kind of like a date to show the romantic side of life, and every Saturday he will take her on like a research mission, and he is specifically researching cults, and so like we have a whole lot of stuff with that. So trigger warnings for that. Trigger warnings for abuse of a parent, trigger warnings for grief and loss of a family member, things like that. So it's not your fluffy rom-com with no substance. Emily Henry's really good at writing substance and really making our characters go through it, basically. And it's really shown in here, especially because like the thing that January is dealing with and going through is not what I expected. And it definitely has this element of, oh, okay, so this is the route we're going down now, and I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of good conversations in here, especially surrounding like the grief elements of what's going on. Kind of like I mentioned, they do take a turn in a way that I didn't expect, but like it was really nice seeing our 2 main characters, because they both come from very, I don't want to say broken homes, because like that's not true, but very non-traditional things happen. They both have lots of issues kind of situation, and seeing the 2 of them really come together, see the 2 of them kind of get over it, and then like the chemistry that has grown between them. Their conversations are always so entertaining. I love whenever there's just like a bunch of dialogue between them. So I love this. There's also a lot of conversation here about like happy endings and what that means to different people, both because like she's more optimistic than he is, and so like his happy endings to her are not happy endings, and so like that conversation is always just really interesting to read about, and it was like a constant theme in this book. So I very much enjoyed it. I loved reading it on the beach. It felt appropriate for the title, but I just love Emily Henry's books. She just always has a way of giving it that rom-com feeling, but also having a much deeper conversation behind it. The next one that I finished on the beach as well was just, I think, one of my favorites of this month, and that was A Dance with the Fae Prince by Elise Kova. This one also got 5 stars. I adored this book. Every time I get like into one of these books, I forget until I'm reading how much I love this series. Now granted, this is only the second one, but I had the same feelings about the first one as well. So this one specifically follows Katria, and I believe his name is Davian. It's not on the back, but that sounds right. And so basically she's forced into this marriage by her stepmother. She doesn't even know who she's marrying, and it turns out that he is this Fae Prince, and she somehow interrupts a ritual, and all of the magic that should have gone to him goes to her instead, and it is like almost an adventure journey, but like not to the extent that it's boring. Like I don't know how to explain it. It's just fantastic. And what Elise Kova does is she always takes, at least in this series, she's taken like a story from Greek mythology and a fairy tale and kind of meshed them together. So this one specifically is Cinderella and a Psyche and Eros, and as you're reading you can totally see those hints, but it's still like a completely different story. It's not a retelling of Cinderella, a retelling of Psyche and Eros. It's a story that has those elements in it. And I love just kind of picking up on all those different bits and pieces while I was reading it. I also adored the romance between our main two characters. It is slow burn, but it's not slow burn in the sense of like, oh my god, I just want something to happen. Can things happen finally? It's a very realistic pace, and as like the chemistry grows between them, it again is very realistic on the timeline of how when things are happening and when they feel certain things. There's also a lot about like trauma specifically for her around love because of what that word means to her and her family, and she's thought that, you know, people do things and say that it's love, and she's like, but is it really? And so it was her kind of dealing with those issues. I will say trigger warnings in here for familial abuse, both physically and emotionally, so just be wary of that. It's more like you don't see the physical stuff, you do see the emotional stuff, but you don't really see the physical stuff. You just see kind of like the repercussions of it, and how it affects her in her daily life. But I love the chemistry between them. I love these worlds that this author creates because like it's set in a much bigger scope, in like the sense of like there's this big world of smaller worlds. So like the first book follows the elves, and this book follows the Fae, and like the elf king and queen are mentioned in this book, but again, you don't really have to have read the first book. They really don't do anything about this except for mention them as like being a thing. And so it's nice seeing those hints, and also nice seeing a brand new set of characters, a brand new culture that like was hinted at in the first book that we never really saw, and now we can see. And so I love this for people who really want that rom-com, not rom-com, but like fantasy romance feel, but this is more new adult than adult. I mean, it's got some adult stuff in it, which is why I would say it's new adult, because like the steamy scenes are not necessarily explicit. So if you want something that's a little cleaner, then this is definitely a book for you. But I love them so much, and I don't know what it is, but like I was reading, and like within the first chapter I was immediately hooked. So I just adore this series and this author and her stuff, and I can't wait for the third one to come out in this series. I'm so excited. The next book that I ended up picking up was Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This was the last book in my 5-star prediction video that I was able to do a newer version of last month. I did give this one 4 stars though. It had a lot of stuff about this that I did really enjoy, but it did have that very stereotypical YA fantasy feel to it, and I don't know, it just didn't feel like as original as what I'm looking for. The main character, Elizabeth, she was fine. I didn't feel I didn't hate her. There was nothing about her that like actively had me disliking her, but she was very, I don't know, just kind of like bland. What you would expect from a YA protagonist, nothing crazy. I should tell you what this book's about. So this story follows Elizabeth, and it's set in a world of kind of like libraries, and all of these libraries hold grimoires. And basically what they are is like magical books that, if put in the right situation, they can like turn into these evil creatures. So they're very evil. I wouldn't say evil, they're not all evil, but like they're very mischievous, and there's all these libraries and all these librarians and wardens who are in charge of them to basically make sure that they stay calm and like don't cause like chaos and havoc. And so we follow Elizabeth, who wants to be a warden, and so she's working at this library, and she has always been taught that sorcerers are evil. It's just like a common knowledge thing for people who work in libraries. And so one night a grimoire escapes, and she is blamed for it, and a sorcerer named Nathaniel has come to like basically like take her to her sentencing, I guess, and things happen, and they end up going on an adventure and try to figure out what's going on and who's actually doing the thing. And so it's really interesting because my favorite characters were Nathaniel and this other guy named Silas, who was kind of like Nathaniel's sidekick, because in this world, in order to become a sorcerer, you have to bind yourself to a demon. So you have to summon a demon, and then you have to bind yourself in the sense of like you give it a certain period of like a certain amount of lives or years off your life to this demon, and then they will serve you in any capacity. And so Silas is Nathaniel's demon, and so like he is such a fascinating character. He's for sure my favorite character because he's a fascinating character in the sense of like we see a very tame version of him because he's been bound to somebody, but we also throughout the story we see all sides of him, and he is not necessarily 100% a good person, but it's really Elizabeth struggling with the fact that, like, she has thought her entire life that demons and sorcerers and all that stuff were evil, and actually they're not nearly as bad as she thinks they are, and what is good and what is bad, and like, this is something 100% good and 100% bad? Probably not. There's that middle gray ground, and so it's a lot of conversation of that, specifically with like her and Silas, and I thought that was really interesting. And Nathaniel's just a big old sassy pot, and I love him so much. So I really enjoyed a lot of this book. The ending was very abrupt. Like, things happened, and then all of a sudden we had an epilogue, and the epilogue summed up everything, and it was almost like the author didn't want to write the big final scene. She just wanted to tell us what happened. And I felt like it needed a couple more chapters before we got to the epilogue. I don't know, it felt very abrupt, and it felt weird. It just ended oddly, you know? It is a standalone, so there's, well, according to Goodreads, I think there might be another one, but it was supposed to be a standalone, and I'm happy with it. I feel like I don't need to read anything else. It was good. I enjoyed my time reading it. The journey aspect and learning about all of these different magical things was really cool, and I liked this magical library element, but there wasn't anything like crazy original, so it was just generally kind of okay, but I did give it 4 stars because there was a lot about it that I liked. The next book that I read was Volume 2 of Spy Family by Tatsuya Endo. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. I really adored the second volume. What I loved about it at the very beginning is it does kind of have a wrap-up, so it wraps up all the characters, the mission of the story, key people that we've met, and just kind of give you an idea of what had happened in the first one. So if you're like me and you put many a month between them, you are not confused going in, and I loved that. I don't know if it continues with the rest of the series, but I adored it, and I think it was very helpful for me. So this series I talked about quite a bit, but it basically follows 3 people. We've got our main male lead, which is Twilight, and he is a spy, and so he's been sent on a mission to infiltrate this boarding school because this guy who's supposed to have a lot of ties politically to kind of, I wouldn't say there's a war going on, but there's definitely a conflict going on between 2 different parts of the country, but this guy has ties to the opposite side of Twilight, and so Twilight's been sent to basically like infiltrate the boarding school because this guy's kids go there and hopefully get into good terms with him. So he creates this family with a kid and a wife and basically gets his kid to go to school. Now, fun things about these kids in the family is that the kid, Anya, is a telepath, and so she can read everyone's mind, and she knows exactly what her dad wants, and so like she is out to kind of do the best that she can. And then the wife of this family is actually an assassin. So, and Twilight doesn't know that yet. And so this is just the continuation on from the first one. The first volume was really all about just kind of creating this family. This one is now actually like in the school. And so mostly it follows Anya as she's in the school creating friends, trying to become friends with this guy's kids because she knows it's important for this mission. And then also just some extra characters that have, especially at the very end, and a character shows up and he's gonna cause some havoc for the future. I don't know where it's gonna go. But this one is significantly less action-packed than the first one, I would say, because again, the first one's really just kind of setting up this family, and so you see a lot of the history of all the characters, and this one's much more chill because they're trying to be a family and they're trying to show that they are a normal family, and it's mostly just Anya going to classes. So I'm interested to see where we continue, because again, this left on quite a bit of a cliffhanger with some stuff that could go down in the future. So I do have, as of right now, I think up to volume 6. I think there are 10 in the series, but up to volume 6, so I can definitely keep continuing with it, and I just really adore this family. I think they're so cute, and like they work together so well. Like, they're not a real family, but like they act like a real family, and it's just so perfect. So I gave it 4.5 stars just because it was a little bit slower getting into it, and I don't think that was because I didn't have, because I had the wrap up from the first book, so it wasn't that I just forgot. It was like they was just really slow getting into it. But once we were in it, I was in it, and I'm very excited to continue because I love this series so much. And we're only on volume 2, but like I have so much more of the series to go, and I'm so excited. The next one that I read was my nonfiction for the month, and that was The Maid and the Queen, The Secret History of Joan of Arc by Nancy Goldstone. This one got 4 stars from me. I really enjoyed it, but I think it deserves a reread at some point in the future, because this is basically set into 3 parts. We have before Joan, during Joan, and after Joan, and it's called The Maid and the Queen because the current king of France at the time of Joan of Arc, his mother-in-law really pulled a lot of the strings behind the scenes because I wouldn't say he was incompetent, but he wasn't the best of kings. And he was afraid to do anything, and so she was trying to like pulling strings behind the scenes to make things happen, and she's the one who really got the ball rolling on Joan of Arc and kind of putting her in front of the king, and making her seem like this crazy holy person. So it was very interesting in that sense, but the first part was the lead up to that, and it was a lot of history thrown at you very quickly. And I feel like either it needed to be condensed and like, I don't know, summed up a little bit more, or it needed to go into a little bit more detail. I don't really know what the issue was, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention as well because I was listening to the audio of this while I was doing other things, and I try to not do that with Nancy Goldstone books because I love her writing so much, but they really need to be focused on, and I know I didn't focus as well as I should have with this book. So I think it deserves a reread for that reason. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that, especially in the first third of the book, I didn't pick up on because it wasn't really until the end that I realized who this queen was and how important she was, whereas I know she was mentioned multiple times in the very beginning. So this one was mostly my fault, but I loved the story. I loved seeing all of the behind the scenes things and the actual like documentation and stuff that we saw of Joan, and like basically like people in the court would document what was going on, and seeing how the king reacted and how Joan actually was a very integral part in this entire story or this time in history, and it was just really interesting. But I don't know, there's just something about the story of Joan of Arc that I find really fascinating, especially because, which is weird, because I don't like books about war. I mean, I don't hate books about war, but I try to steer clear of them because I find war, especially nonfiction books about war, very boring. And so I was hesitant, like I was excited, but I was worried because Joan of Arc really only happened because of a war, but it worked really well. I like the way that this book was formatted in those 3 sections. It really made certain things important, and I don't know, I love her writing. I think she's such an accessible writer, and she makes history interesting. I don't know how to explain it beyond that, like, if she writes something about a time period or a person that you are interested in, I highly recommend that book because she's going to make it easy to understand what's going on. So this was just the most recent one I read by her, and I did really enjoy it, and I want to reread it so I can give it my full attention next time. The next book that I picked up was Poison by Sarah Pinborough. I ended up giving this one 3 stars, and I think my biggest issue with this book was I was not 100% sure what I was getting into, or what I thought I was getting into was not actually what happened. So this is the start of a trilogy, and each story in this book follows a different fairy tale, and it's kind of what I thought it was going to be was a reimagining of the story, where like the bad guy wasn't actually the bad guy. So this one specifically is the story of Snow White. So I went into this one thinking that the bad guy was going to be Snow and not the stepmother or the evil queen. But it turns out that that's not true. Like, the stepmother was still evil, but it just kind of expanded on some stuff. You got different perspectives that we've never seen before with this fairy tale, and also, like, some of the plot holes, and maybe not plot holes, but, like, some things that could have been explained more, but, like, the story, there wasn't anything in for those situations. And then, like, she wrote those, and I found that really interesting. My biggest issue with this book was the end, because I don't know what happened. Not in the sense of I read it and I'm like, what is going on? In the sense of I read it, I understand what happened, but I don't know why they happened, or what the importance of the things that happened are, or if the outcome is what I think it is. And so that's where I was confused. And it's not in the sense of like, you know, it's kind of left up in the air and you can decide very ambiguously. It doesn't have that ending. It's got an ending, but I still don't know the importance of what happened, I guess. And I just wish there was more explanation as to why the things that happened occurred. So the ending has really, like, dampened my enjoyment of it, but it was a pretty decent short book. there wasn't anything exciting. Like, it was just the story of Snow White, but we just happened to see more of what happens when the prince and her meet, more of the dwarf's perspectives and why she's such a big fan of the dwarves, a little bit more on the stepmother's perspectives and why she and Snow don't get along, but it still is just like nothing too dramatic is added to the story. But at the same time, it was more adult than it should have been. Like, in the first pages, adult things happened, but there was like no purpose to them, because like what it was trying to showcase could have been explained in a much more interesting way than like a situation that made me very uncomfortable. So like it was overall it was just weird, and I'm not sure what I read. And like it's good for a readathon, but like you know? So, I mean, I'm not sure if I will hold on to these. I might keep them just in case I need something for readathons in the future, but it's just kind of But I followed that up with a great book because I read Surrender of a Siren by Tessa Dare, and this is the second in her Wanton Dairymaids trilogy, which I was super worried about going into because the first book in the series I really didn't like, and I wasn't sure what we were going to get into with this one, but I adored it and gave it 4 stars. So this one follows Sophia, who we did meet in the first book, and she is just like tired of society. She's a pampered heiress. Everything about her life is not great. She wants adventure. She just wants to get away. So she basically runs away and finds this man named Gray who owns a ship, and she gets passage on his ship out of England, and she puts on the disguise of a governess, and it's the two of them and their relationship and things that spur from that. But the diversity in this book is incredible, and the reaction to the diversity in this book is incredible, because like not many historical romances have much diversity, if any, and it was really interesting to see that take a part of the story, but it also wasn't like this is here to be a diverse character. It was, this character happens to be diverse, let's move on. And you don't see that much in historical romances, and I really enjoyed that, and like that diversity is going to continue into the third one, and I'm so excited to see how that's gonna work. And I don't know, there's just a lot about this that I really adored. This does have those piratey vibes because I'd say 95% of this took place on a ship, but also the ending changed it. Like while I was reading this book, it was just kind of like, this book is okay. I am enjoying my time reading this. The chemistry is kind of there, but like when I'm not reading it, it's not like I feel like I need to pick it up. However, once we got about halfway through, the chemistry between our characters really took a turn, and I started to get really invested in it, and then the ending was amazing. I thought it was so good, and I'm really nervous about the third one because this was such a high compared to the first one, and there's a character in the third one that I hated in the first book, and so I'm really worried that he's gonna mess everything up. But overall, really adored this. I'm not sure if it's because I went in with such low expectations or if this book was actually just generally really, really good, but either way, my enjoyment of this was much higher than I anticipated. And if you like a good piratey book, it's not really a pirate book, but like it's set on the seas, then you'll enjoy this one. The next one I picked up was my middle grade, and that was Rumaysa, and this is a fairy tale by Raja Hafsa. I took in this one 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed the diversity of this book because it does follow our main character, Rumaysa. It's set into like 3 separate stories. So the first story follows her, and she lives in this kind of tower. A witch put her there, and she spins gold for the witch. And the witch has basically stolen her from her family. She knows this, and she's basically forced to just spin gold forever. And so she decides to escape one day, and so she makes this very long hijab and uses it to escape. And then the next 2 stories are both based on fairy tales. We have Sleeping Sarah, which is the last one, which is kind of like Sleeping Beauty, and then the middle one is like Cinderella. And so we've got our main character, and she plays a part in both of these stories. The diversity in here was fantastic. I know young kids are gonna love to see themselves, and that is fantastic. I think having that kind of representation and diversity is awesome. But there wasn't anything like amazing about these stories. I don't know what it was. It just kind of generally felt okay. And I don't know if that's because the writing was meant for significantly younger readers and it was on like the younger side of middle grade, and the younger side of middle grade and I don't get along all the time. So like maybe it was that, but like there was nothing that felt spectacular about this book. However, this book was not written for me. So you definitely have to take my review with a grain of salt because A, the age range, much younger than I am. Young kids are going to love seeing these new inspired fairy tales that you can very clearly see are based on certain things. There's a lot of stuff about this that like you have to be wary going in based on my opinion, but I don't know, like it just, maybe it was because it was 3 short stories and it wasn't one continuous story. They felt very rushed. They felt like nothing was really happening, and then all of a sudden things got wrapped up very, very quickly. I don't know. There was just some sort of disconnect for me, and I'm not sure what it was, because like all of those things are things that happen in middle grade, and I know that. I'm not sure why this didn't work for me, but I enjoyed my time reading it when I did, but it was just kind of like, I don't know, it was just generally okay. So, a lot of things about this book that I'm not the target audience for, so that's fine. So, like, I'm sure many, many kids will definitely enjoy this, but I think because it's kind of a story of smaller stories, that's where the disconnect was for me. But still really liked it. It has some awesome illustrations throughout the book, and I think that's incredible. And seeing these fairy tales that we know so well reimagined was really interesting. So I think this is definitely something that everyone should read. Like put it on all of like your younger reader lists, because I just think it's really good to see all this different representation. But again, I'm not the target audience for this book. And the very last book that I was able to actually squeeze in, I finished it on the very last day of the month, and that was The Taming of the Queen by Philippa Gregory. So this was the most recent one in the series of Plantagenet and Tudor England by Philippa Gregory that I have been reading. This one follows Catherine Parr, and she is the last wife of Henry VIII. So we've now reached that time period where we are now moving on to his kids. So this one, like I said, follows Catherine Parr. She's about 30 years old, I think. Yes, she has been married twice, widowed twice, and the book starts with Henry VIII coming up to her and basically saying, "You're going to marry me." I mean, he asks her to marry him, but it's the King of England. You can't really say no. And she has a man that she's been in love with, so you have that kind of conflict as well. But you see Catherine come in after a bunch of wives that he's had and be very scared. Also, you have to know with these books, Philippa Gregory is a historian. She dives deep. So this is as historically accurate as you possibly could make it. I mean, obviously there are bits and pieces like the private moments between her and Henry that like you can't know that for sure. It's a guess based on other things that you have found, other like the writings of Catherine Parr and things like that, but like you can't know for sure. But as far as like fiction and non-fiction elements of this goes, this is as historically accurate as you probably could make it. So this follows the entire relationship between Catherine and Henry. So she's come in, she is the 6th wife. She has come after both 2 very short relationships. Kitty Howard right before her, who was beheaded, I think only lasted like a year and a half, and then before her, Anne of Cleves, who Henry divorced, only lasted 6 months. And so she is coming in to all of the, like it's just, she's coming into a court that is always on edge, and she always has to be on edge and be very careful what she says, because if she says the wrong thing, then she could lose her head or be divorced, or like she could, all things bad could happen to her. So it was really interesting to see that. You see her kind of have to deal with the fact that like all of her jewelry, all of her clothes, all of her crowns and stuff belonged to previous queens and were commissioned for previous queens. But she also has to deal with the fact that Henry is still very much obsessed with his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, who was the one who gave him a son, and she died in childbirth. And so to him, she's an angel. She gave him a son. She's on a pedestal, so she has to always kind of be second to this dead woman, and it's her dealing with that. But at the same time, she comes into his court knowing nothing, and throughout her years being with Henry, and Henry's going back and forth of the Reformation, basically him going back and forth between Protestantism and being a Catholic and the Roman Catholic Church, and like what was, you know, right and what was heresy and what wasn't, and you know, like she had to deal with this because like as she's in this court, she's also learning. She's studying. She's learning the Bible. She's understanding how she feels about religion, and she came in knowing none of that. And so through the like couple of years that they were married, having that relationship and also having her be like one of the most studious and brilliant queens out there was really fascinating to see, because like she learned all these things and then she became very aware of how she thinks and how she feels and how she knows like what she feels is right, and then having to deal with Henry changing his mind on what he thinks and what the country thinks, and her family putting pressure on her to basically bring him back to the Reformation and that kind of period. So there's a lot of talk about religion in this book, because at that time Henry's going all over the place. Like he started by giving like the regular common people a Bible in English, and then all of a sudden he's taking it away, and then he's, you know, talking with Catherine and like his bishop at the time, and they're translating all of these hymns and all of these kind of masses and things like that, these rituals, into English so that everyone can understand them, and then he's taking them back and saying that that is heresy and you can't actually have those things, and she's the one who helped write it. And so like it's all these ridiculous things, and just dealing with the king that is so wishy-washy, and being able to survive that. So it's definitely, this book is all over the place. There's not really a main plot except for the fact that it just takes place during her time married to Henry. But I loved seeing this queen. I thought it was very interesting, especially seeing one of the the last queen. I don't actually know that much about her, so to see this author's take on it was really interesting. And then obviously there's always an author's note at the back, and she kind of explains what's real, what isn't, and I love seeing that. I'm excited to continue with this series, move on from him to his kids now, specifically Elizabeth. I mean, clearly she's going to be the queen for a long time, so we're going to see a lot of her and just those elements to it. So I'm very interested to see where the series goes and what each book contains, but it was very interesting getting this kind of wrap up of Henry's life. Oh, I didn't tell you, but I gave it 4 stars. And that's it. Those are the 10 books that I read in the month of June. Again, I will leave my vlogs down below if you'd like to check out anything like that, because I definitely went into much more detail than I did here. But I hope that you enjoyed, and let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, or if there's a book that you read in June that you would like to talk about. Let me know down below. If you participated in whatever-thon, let me know how you did. Did you reach your goal? I just barely did. I made it to 10 books, but like, we almost didn't get there. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you would like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to check all that out, and I will see you guys in my next video.